check. Uh, I actually, are we live?
I
I
see
don't
the
know.
live
I see
icon.
the live button, but on LinkedIn, oh, maybe I need to refresh the page. Hold on 1 second.
It
Oh
says
yeah,
that
yeah,
you're
yeah.
live
It's
right now.
live. It's live. It's I. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay. Hi, Catherine. Yay.
Hi.
Okay, so this is just a very unfiltered chat between 2 p.m. gals.
Yeah.
uh, I am just fascinated by your journey, especially the way you became a product manager.
Yeah.
How tell us how you made that pivot.
So I'll give you the short version. So I was
Yeah.
working at a startup from like basically I was employee number 3 at that startup, and then I had been working there for 6 years. And my job title at the time of the pivot was director of content. So like primarily I was overseeing like the creator system and making sure the creators were engaged in producing a lot more content, our sellable assets. And I would get messages from recruiters of content manager roles at other companies. And when I would read the job description, it was very clear that what they were advertising is not what I did. And that was a moment when I asked, like, who's wrong here? Is it me that understands my role wrong, or is it the recruiter? And it definitely was me. So I went through a bit of an identity crisis, which is like, what am I? Who am I compared to somebody outside in another tech company? And thankfully, I was doing a research about a problem I was trying to solve, and I ran into an article written by, I think it was a Twitter PM. And that's when I asked, like, what's a product manager? And when I read the description, I realized, hey, a lot of the components of my job that I do like is actually a product manager. So I had approached my boss, who was the CEO, and asked, hey, is it all right if I go through this pivot? I think my skill set better aligns here. And the big secret that a lot of people are asking for, and which to me is not so much of a secret at all, is that after about 6 years and you've performed quite well, you tend to build quite a level of career capital that you can navigate this type of pivot. So for me, it was very unceremonious. He said, okay. We created a timeline as to when that would happen, how the handoff of the responsibilities would go. And we even made sure that there would be like a senior inside the organization that we would hire to help me grow in that role as well. So,
Oh, okay. So at that time, you were the first product manager at that company?
yes.
Oh, wow. And then they hired a more senior person to help
Yeah.
you. That's
Yeah.
really nice.
Yeah.
They're very supportive.
Yeah, yeah.
And
So it was definitely a great like kind of environment to grow. It was interesting, especially in this case, because I was taking over from essentially the founders. The founders were the PMs,
oh,
and
okay.
doing it at the 6 year mark is a very
Yeah.
interesting challenge.
And what was that challenge?
A lot of it had to do with really understanding. There's one thing to understand your role very deeply, but there's another thing to now understand the business very deeply. At that
Mm.
time, by the time I took over the business is not worried about 0 to 1,
Hmm.
right? So you'd have to catch up to everything. Now you're really worried about kind of scaling. And also for that particular company, they had a sister company that was based in China. So like there's a lot of context switching as well,
Uh-huh.
and understanding completely different business models. So it was a very interesting and fun time, I would say. Very challenging. Yeah.
Would you say in this company you learned about 0 to 1 and then 1 to 10 or 1 to 100? So you kind of experience a whole thing at this
Yeah.
one company.
I would definitely say that. Like you learn a lot about that 0 to 1 phase because you're there grinding it out with the founders as well. And then when you go through the 1 to 10, that's really when everybody's, I feel like we all had to grow up. Like for context, like the average age at our company at the time was mid 20s.
Oh, wow.
So it's like we're all figuring this out together because it takes a different level of maturity and also rigor that comes with scaling any sort of thing. Like, for example, I remember in that content role, I was managing basically around like almost 20% of the workforce inside the organization. And to take on that responsibility in your mid 20s is like really massive like with everything that anybody's ever said about people leadership, most people don't get training. I
Yeah.
definitely didn't. So I learned the hard way of the common failures of people leadership. And now I
Like
have
what?
like, maybe try learning. Well, one major thing that I learned was how to hire.
Mm.
I think that was more so a reflection that came well after the fact of the people management, is just learning how to hire and what to look for in candidates. I think there's this scrappiness that I had to let go of from the 0 to 1 phase, because in the 0 to 1 we were just like, do they have enough drive, or are they hungry? Great. And that was like the bare minimum to kind of get in. And now it became like whether these people actually saw a vision in themselves of how they would like to grow. I don't think I did enough of that back then. That for me, this is actually a challenge that I would like to take on again, but this time with a newfound lens that, hey, I've aged a bit since my mid 20s, and now I feel like people management is something I'd like to explore again, especially after doing product management, because in product you have to let go of, well, especially because I went from people management to product management, I had to let go of being in charge in the same
Oh,
capacity. I'm no longer anybody's boss, and now I'm just kind of at everybody's mercy if I don't play my cards right. Right? So it's a very different game. I think it was a very big eye opener. Like, how do I exert any sort of influence without having any say on anybody's, like, performance reviews or anything like that?
right. But
Yeah.
you already had capital that you built up
Yeah.
in this company.
Yeah.
So imagine if you didn't have that capital.
Yeah.
How would that feel like
In regards to making a
as
pivot?
being a PM in a company, and you're not a
Yeah.
new PM, but you're
Yeah.
a new employee in that company. You don't have any authority.
Yeah, I think somebody coming in brand new would have a lot more challenges, and like we saw that too. By the way, like with the individual that was supposed to be kind of the senior, they had a lot more challenges than I did. So
Oh,
that was also when we realized, like, hey, like senior in just years of experience doesn't necessarily give you as much leeway. For example, like by that time, I had already built really great relationships with the designers and the developers because I had already been working
yeah,
with them. They just even see me around, right? Like, and they
right.
can see that I'm a high impact um, employee already. So
Yeah.
they trust me a lot more than they trust a new face. So
Mhm.
very understandable. So
Yeah.
coming in, definitely a different challenge.
And how do you make that mental shift coming from a like people manager to individual contributor product manager?
First off, I was actually thrilled. I think taking on people management that early in my career, and like at an age where I just wasn't exposed to the right learnings quite yet,
Mm,
it was extremely daunting to have literally multiple people's career trajectory, their pay rely on you and your performance as a leader.
yeah.
Whereas being an IC was a lot like a sigh of relief,
Mm,
just knowing that, hey, I have objectives I have to hit, and
yeah.
that's it. And then I have to do it with my team. Like, that
Yeah.
was a little bit challenging of how to
Mhm,
navigate that space,
mhm.
but I wasn't completely lost. Again, knowing the individuals and
Yeah,
understanding like their motivations and how they operate helped a lot. But
yeah.
yeah, I liked that transition from people
Good.
leadership to IC.
Yeah, that's good. And because at this company, so you say you experienced 0 to 1 and then 1 to 10 or 1 to 100.
Mm.
Was that when did you experience a 0 to 1? Was it before you became wait before you got the PM title, or was it after?
I think it was more so when I got in as the intern. I think the experience in
Oh,
0 to 1, because if you think about the 0 to 1, I was part of that one of getting that product market fit,
yeah,
like because I was part of the students that was told about this product, and I was like, I'm in. And here
yeah.
I am contributing and really adding to that whole ecosystem.
And how do you define what product market fit is?
For me, the biggest thing for product market fit is having people really jump at if they have that pain point, you present the
Mm,
solution and they just jump right at it. You don't
mm,
have to go through additional cycles to get there. In fact, for me, one of the big things that I also look for is whether people even are actively looking for some sort of solution. In which case, for what we were doing, i.e., supplementary notes that might be helpful for you in your examinations or assignments, there was fit, right?
mm.
Students, without even having to explain to any student, regardless of what generation they come from, you know
They
that
need,
this is like this is a hot thing, and
yeah.
you'll see students do this in every context.
Got it. And was there like a ceremony that says, okay, we're at one now?
I don't remember there was any ceremony. I think I remember the energy in that company because we were all like in our 20s. It
Yeah.
was we were just like going hard for every single thing that we could,
Mm,
and it wasn't so much a ceremony. I think we were just really working hard towards that next goal of like, okay,
okay.
so we got to one, now let's find more schools. And I think that was also part of like why they said, hey, since you figured it out, I figured out how to make it work for you individually, can you find more individuals like you?
I see.
Yeah.
So what did scaling entail? Going from one school to a lot of schools, or how was that defined?
Yeah, so one schools to a few schools
Hmm.
was a lot of it was actually guerrilla marketing when that was really hot. So this was in more of the 20 teens when we were doing a lot of actually on campus promotion. There was actually a very big campaign we did back then. And some people like in their late 20s might remember this, where we actually had Red Bull and we would deliver them to different campuses during final exam time, where they would get like a four case pack of Red Bull and some notes,
Oh,
like
wow.
get access. So just like really get that whole message home that, hey, if you're struggling right now, here's some Red Bull, but also
Some
come on to the
notes.
thing. So like, so we really focus a lot on those type of campaigns. Obviously the scalability was an issue. So after we realized that, hey, as successful as these campaigns might be on a local geographic scale, this is not something that, especially for us as a software company, to really rely on these going forward. So that's really when we had to change up our strategies of how we were going to advertise, going a lot more online. For me, in my role, what that meant was focusing a lot more on the individual user, the personas, what's driving them, like what's the psychology that's going through their head, and how can I scale
Mm.
that in a scalable manner that doesn't require me to actually physically meet them. There was a time that I would actually go on campus and meet students and tell them
Oh,
more, like very, very hard, like guerrilla marketing, like getting out on campus, trying to like talk to students and get people to start singing the praises of sharing notes and why that's useful for you.
wow, I see. And then for the scaling, what made it really hard?
For us, it was the context switch too, is not knowing exactly what it was. I think because when we at least for me, when I was doing it on campus, it was for me very easy to find out where I need to go next, because it would be where the students are physically collecting and talking to them and really understanding their needs and wants. And then when we got into scaling, because at that point we were now scaling to schools in the US, clearly I wasn't going to fly to every single school. The US is
Oh,
a much
you
larger market.
expanded to the US.
Yes. So we
Okay.
started like really trying to push hard for the US expansion, but like
Okay.
clearly I could not do the same thing of like sitting there at every single school, just like crashing like student communal areas and be like, hey guys, have you heard of this site? It was not going to work. So that was really hard for us because we hadn't done that type of work before. And I know
Mm-hmm.
for me, it was like, how do I solve this problem in a way that makes sense, that's scalable? And I think also because like for me, one of the challenging things when I was younger was I didn't seek out mentors, which is a whole separate topic of which I'm now very, very passionate about. I hadn't sought out anybody to really help, so it was just like me racking my little head about how to solve this problem, and it was very, very challenging to get through. But we started to find our own ways of expanding that,
Okay.
and that was really when I moved over to product management, where my methods stopped involving me going to campuses all the time.
Oh, I see. So when you moved to product, that's when you started to really scale in a
Yes.
serious way.
Yeah.
And that how did you figure it out? Like how was the scaling done?
Well, for me, it was um, like brute force, because you keep trying different
Yeah.
things and it's not going to
Okay.
work. Eventually, you go like I I think still think it was very lucky, but one of the things for me was, and this is a story I tell often in interviews, but it was one that really represents this story very well. Was really looking at what motivated our creators, because our creators really
Mm.
drove the whole economy of what attracted people to us.
Mm.
And at the time I had looked into, you know I had asked the question, I'm like, well, who's already coming to the site and why were they coming? So I looked and to see, like, I had convinced an engineer to teach me how to use SQL, because I would ask him all these questions. He's like, "Here, let me teach you SQL so that you don't bother me anymore." I'm
Right.
like, "Okay, cool, thanks." And then I started looking at, like, oh, like, do we have anybody showing that behavior already? We saw that there were a few users, and then I was like, well, can I ask them questions? So then I sent them an email and said, "Hey, like, why do you do this?"
Oh.
And then they told me, and I was like, and I found out a lot of their reasons was something that I could scale, not through any necessary software thing. I was like, this is all psychology. So then I
Mm.
sent like a drip email sequence out to them just to see, like, hey, can I get them to keep coming back? But not only that, can I make more of them?
Uh-huh.
And then that was when we started seeing, like, semester over semester, like, growth. And that's when I reference a lot of that scaling. A lot of that came from the creators, because when you scale the creators, you're going to get better quality content. With better quality content, you're going to get a lot more people saying, hey, look, they have the things that I need for when I need it.
Right.
So
And
that was, yeah.
what's an example of this psychology behavior that you found out by
Yeah.
querying the database? What was that?
Well, it wasn't so much for the querying the database, just showed me that there was a population already doing this behavior. It was around, like, just like a handful. And
What was that behavior that they were doing?
yeah, it was altruism. So
Oh,
the why, when I asked them about the why,
yeah.
because we did offer some compensation, but a lot of it was driven behind the altruism of sharing notes. So I was like, well, I can share that. So that's something that we really leverage in terms of um, how we want to grow the individuals. And also, like, it really aligned with our vision as well of why we did this in the first place, which was for the educational piece for students who needed access, because we understood that not everybody learns in a very specific way.
Mm.
um, well, I find, like, educational institutions as a whole generally typically stick to one version, and it doesn't really necessarily accommodate for the full breadth of
Yeah.
all the different learners out there. And we know that for students, sometimes being live in class, as helpful as it is, sometimes they do need supplementary materials, and that's really what we wanted to focus on. And we want to make sure students also had an opportunity to be part of that picture as well. So as creators, they weren't just supplying us with content, but they could actually also build up their portfolio of work.
Are you saying that you found a population of creators who were sharing content
Yes,
and
but
they're
regularly.
regularly
Yeah,
sharing content, and then you didn't understand
yeah,
why they were doing that, and then you reach out to some of them, and then you learned
yeah.
that they're just doing it because they believe in it.
Yeah, they believe in it, they feel good, they're doing it
Mm.
for other students. They're not doing it, like, to feed our engines, they're doing
Uh-huh.
it to help students that aren't in a position to help themselves, or they understand the pain points that we were trying to target of why we came to exist in the first place.
Got it. And then how did you capitalize on this natural behavior of them just wanting to help other students? Like,
Well,
how did you lean into that?
the hypothesis was that a lot of people who were coming to the site didn't know that they had this opportunity available to them. That
Oh,
as a creator, as a potential creator, so a creator to be, you didn't know that this was a number one driver, and that you can be positioned in a way that puts you on a pedestal and allows you to be a creator. So we really leaned heavy on more like what's now known as, like, the creator economy. I saw that was, like, really hot, in certain things. And I was like, oh, well, we were doing that back then, but
Yeah.
in the context of students, of saying, hey, do you want to be a creator and you want to get your notes in front of students and help students who aren't
Oh.
positioned to learn as effectively as other students? And a lot of students bought into that message and started.
Oh, so was it more of a marketing messaging exercise, or did you have to
Yeah.
change some product to?
Originally, it was just marketing message. It was
Okay.
just the marketing message, and then we started working on features to really make that a lot more robust. But as far as like
Um,
MVP design, I think that was my first exposure to anything that was an MVP. Sorry. That was my fire alarm. They love to do testing
oh.
whenever I have like meetings, interviews, everything. Yes.
Oh, wow. Wow, that
Yeah.
is fascinating. So basically you looked into data
Yeah.
to see what the people are doing,
Yeah.
and then you saw this particular behavior
Yeah.
that you didn't understand why,
Yeah.
so that you interview them,
Yeah.
and then
It
you
was
figured,
all this, it was all coming from like this curiosity. I'm like,
yeah,
what's like bringing people
what's going
here
on?
already? Yeah,
Uh-huh.
like and like as I said, like we had already passed the 0 to 1, so it's not like we were fighting for users. Like users were coming to the site, and
Mm,
and they were doing things. It was a matter of like really figuring out why, and then having that focus. That was really like, wow, I saw impact. That was like and a measurable impact
right.
too, right? So that really kind of got me started on that whole journey of like, well, what else can I do with these questions that I have?
Oh,
Right. So that was
wow.
like my gateway. I always call that as my gateway drug into product management. It's one of my most fun experiences because I
Yeah,
had no idea. I wasn't working off any sort of framework or
yeah,
anything. I was just like really relying on that curiosity to see if I
right.
can make that number go up.
Yeah. Oh, and then what was that number that went up? Like, what was the metric? Was it number of creators or?
Yeah, it was number of creators, and then ultimately it also brought in like users in general because like what we saw was that at that point, I think, don't quote me on these numbers, I don't know exactly, but like we had like the majority of the people who were accessing content, the content were coming from the very creators that grew out of this program.
Got it. Got it.
Yeah.
And um, did you have to keep on motivating these creators somehow, or they kind of just they could keep themselves motivated?
Yeah, well, that's really when product kicked in. So then we started making product changes to make this more automated, so
Mm.
that they would have an actual creator program to participate in, like tools and promotion methods for them to actually use, so that they can get their
Oh,
notes out there. And I was like, okay, great. Yeah, there's like, so the MVP, there's like some product in there, but the
yeah.
product was very driven on like a lot of the insights that we were getting from the MVP itself, of knowing that,
Wow,
hey, there's actually people who want this. So
that's
yeah,
amazing. And
yeah.
does the product still exist today?
Yes. So
Oh.
like students can still access it and yeah, still share their notes with other
Wow.
students that need content.
Yeah, wow. And so does this mean that they don't have to take notes on their own? They could just go on this platform and get
Yeah.
notes?
So my recommendation for students, I've always said, like, and I noticed this too in my course, is that you should always attempt to do your own learnings first, because there's
Mm.
one thing of like really trying yourself, and then
Mhm.
I always find like comparing
Mm,
content with other people really helps level up your learning. So
true.
I always saw this as a supplement and
Mm,
never a replacement for going to lectures, for example. Like the
right,
conversations inside with a professor are unparalleled.
right,
However, that doesn't, some people aren't listening. There could be language barriers as well.
right.
And that you're just going through so much in a live environment that I completely understand why there needs to be supplementary materials. And that's really
Mhm.
what we were there for.
Oh, got it. Makes total sense. So after this company, you went on a sabbatical.
Yeah.
And then what happened?
Well,
What?
the sabbatical was driven through with burnout. So I think after 10 years of working inside of a company, also like uh, I alluded to this before, but basically I had no idea where I stood next to anybody else. Sure, I had a title,
Mhm.
but I didn't understand what that meant outside, and whether I've done enough. Massive imposter syndrome. And I was just like, I think I think I'm ready for a break. So
Yeah.
so I had started a sabbatical, of which the only curiosity I seemed to have was whether I can hold a conversation with a random stranger. That was the one thing that was on my mind. I realized I never had done because I went to business school, which is very, business driven.
Uh-huh.
And then you work in a startup for 10 years, you realize that you've never actually had a meeting with somebody with no agenda. So I was like, yeah, that seemed fascinating to me. And at the same time, I ran into a platform called Lunch Club, which
Lunch
matches you with,
club.
yes. And it
Oh.
matches you with a random stranger that happens to be free at the same time that you are. And so you don't have to deal with like the cold email request of saying, hey, are you free to talk?
I
I
have
won't
to
tell you
look
anything.
this up. It's called
And
lunch club.
yeah, it's called Lunch Club. And then I was like, sick, I'll sign up. I went for my first call. I was sweating bullets because I was so scared about holding a conversation with a complete stranger for 45 minutes. I'm like, what are we going to talk about? But
45 minutes.
yes,
That's
45.
really long.
Yes. So you have to learn how to do that. And I was like, oh my God. I was like sweating. So then after that call though, I was like, I learned so much today. I learned about like what they're currently working on. I was sharing like my current journey, and we just kept talking for 45 minutes. I was like, that was so much fun. So I signed up for more. But then
Wow.
Lunch Club actually caps you around 6 a week. So I couldn't I was unemployed at that point. So I really
Six
have a
a
lot of
week.
yeah. So I have like ton of time. So I'm like, what else am I supposed to do with my time? So then I started trying cold asking people on LinkedIn, and I got pretty good at like making these asks. I'd be like, hey, like, you don't know me, I don't know you, but I really want to talk to you.
About what?
I would find something to talk about. I would like tell them up front, like, because the biggest thing, especially when you're doing cold outreach, is to make
Yeah.
sure that you're coming, like you have to disarm them and say, hey, I'm not trying to sell you. I promise I don't have software to sell. I'm unemployed, but I'm also not looking for a job. So like, trust me, I won't ask you that. But like, yeah, if you're down for a conversation. And I got quite a few yeses, like, yeah, sure, I'm down to chat. And then we would just talk about whatever. The
Wow.
conversations go like left, right, and center. It was hilarious how some of the conversations just deviate, and we're just having a really fun time.
Are you still on Lunch Club?
Oh, I like definitely now I am. For context, I was laid off from my most recent one because the startup had run out of money. Long story short, basically I'm laid off. I'm unemployed again, so I'm back on it, and it's just so much fun again. And I'm also reaching back to some of the calls. So like by the time I was done, my sabbatical was 6 months. I had talked to 300 individuals one-on-one. Now, obviously, with that many one-on-ones, you make some friends. You
Right.
actually have ones that become mentors. You have one that might become like. I had some co-founder requests too. It was like really like it was all sorts of things.
Wow.
I also found mentoring and coaching through that as well, because like that was when somebody said, hey, you should try being a coach. And I was like, really? Why? And they're like, oh yeah, you're pretty good at this. And I was like, oh, okay, cool, thanks. And then, moving on. And then when you hear that feedback a few more times, you're like, oh, maybe I should give it a shot. And actually it was a mentee that I have a buy me a coffee website, and it was a mentee that told me to start one up. And I was like, okay, I'll start one up. And he bought me my first coffee.
Wait,
and here it is. It's still running.
Let me bring it up. This is your buy me a coffee. So folks who are watching, like that's the QR code to scan. Okay, wait. So how did you find this website?
Lunch Club?
No, the buy me a coffee.
So as a mentee that I had, he said, hey, these chats are really helpful. You should run like a buy me a coffee website or something. And then I was like, oh, and then I looked it up. I was like, okay, it was easy enough to set up. And then it was a very simple system. So at first I set it up as a tipping system. So I would send it after every call. I say, if you really liked the call, just buy me a coffee. And then I allocated all the funds over to some sort of charity. And now I just let it run.
So this is a result of you going on Lunch Club.
It started from a Lunch Club. However, I started I remember I had an issue with supply. Like I couldn't find enough calls. So then I started like finding all sorts of ways to like get calls. And then I was trying to get like, it was wild. Okay. By the time I was done, I said, I got 300 one-on-ones. A lot of them, I started even running, like I had a little like CRM
Oh my
running on
god.
Notion just to like keep track of the because they're just so fascinating. Like I just could not document, like I couldn't not document them. They're just like, wow, I learned so much.
Like what did you learn from these? So these three sorry, you said 600. You had
Yeah,
600
300.
call. Oh, sorry, 300
Yeah.
calls. Are these 300 different individuals or
Yes,
these
300 different individuals. So some of them led into more calls. So I'm not counting total calls. I'm counting 300 different
Wow.
individuals. And we're just like chatting, and I can't tell you what we like each one doesn't start with an agenda, but we end up having a great time. I'm like, pretty cool.
And what are some of the most interesting stories or like things that resulted from these type of serendipitous
Yeah. I think the
discussions?
I think the one that was the one that was most wild to me was I was in a call with somebody who used to be a VP at like a decent sized tech company, and
Okay.
then I was looking at the background of their video, and I asked them like, where did you live? For context, I'm in Toronto, and they're like, oh, I live in Toronto. I'm like, so do I, but where? Like where? Which intersection? Turns out they were my neighbor.
Oh my
So then
god.
and then I was like, well, I'm currently on sabbatical, and they're like, well, so am I. I'm like, and then they asked like, hey, do you want to go out for a hike, because we have a hiking trail close to us, and we're like, okay, sick. So like next day we were on a hike, just chatting, and especially I think that was the moment when I realized I'm like, oh, I really needed a mentor in my career, where he shared a lot of like life lessons, like listening to my stories, listening to some of my misgivings of my career, of doubts I had about my future trajectory. And he's like, you're really hard on yourself. And it wasn't until I heard that kind of feedback that I was like, oh, I've never heard that from somebody else. Because, also growing up Asian, you're never hard enough on yourself. Like my mother still has many, many points of how I'm imperfect. So, when I heard that, I was like, holy shit, I've never heard that ever in my life. So I started like really thinking hard about that kind of feedback. I've never had that before.
Wow,
So
that's
anyway, that was the
amazing.
most wild story because it went into in real life very quickly.
Yeah.
But like we had so many conversations, and I found the ones that I found the most interesting were people not from tech, because like they're
Oh.
completely looking at like my situation from the outside, and they would give me like some of the most interesting conversation bits that I always hold on to. Like for example, here's one where somebody asked me, "Is like, oh, do you have a tough time? Do you have a tough time celebrating your own wins?" And I said, as a knee jerk reaction, I said, "Oh yeah, I can't do that for the life of me." And they said, "Can't is a very strong word. Can't denotes that you have the inability to do so. Is it that you can't, or do you just find it challenging? And if so, why?" Right? And I was like, no one's
Oh,
ever asked me that before.
that's
And no
deep.
one's ever caught me at these little things that I say to myself all the
Oh
time.
yeah.
So I was like, and that person like worked in the automotive industry, like not related at all. And I was like, these are really cool conversations. So love it. If anybody's ever looking to like level up their conversation game, sit on lunch club. See if you can hold a conversation for 45 minutes.
Can it be shorter, like 20 minutes?
No,
Or they require
I think okay, so I've done like my own personal note taking of like how I notice calls go. The anatomy of the 45-minute call is actually quite, I don't know if they did it like intentionally or what, but in 45 minutes, the first 20 is like
yeah.
general intros, like, oh, like here's my backstory, here's your backstory, some like top level stuff. After about the 20-25 minute mark,
Yeah.
we go deep into things. And I'm like, I don't know if that's just my observation, but all my conversations follow this general pattern. And I noticed that with mentee calls too. That's why I try to go for the 45 minutes to 1 hour, especially if they're looking for like a deeper conversation,
Yeah.
because the first 20 is just to get context, and then we
Yeah.
start getting deep, and it's just so much fun.
Wow. Wow. Okay, so you're back on Lunch Club.
Yeah.
I'm gonna sign up. Maybe I'll see you there.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay, so you went on a 6 month sabbatical.
Yeah.
Did you travel or you just stayed in Toronto?
I did. So I think TikTok's algorithm was very good. I think they knew I was burnt out long before I knew I was burnt out. So this, like, I would say like about maybe 2 months before I had quit, there was like a TikTok video about, hey, do you want to move to East Coast Canada? So like it's just like north of Maine, like we're going to New Brunswick. Like, do you want to live there for a month and they will comp you, well, it's like something like 60 to 100% of your living expenses. And I was like, yes, of course I do it. So this was a COVID thing. So like, I don't know if this phenomenon was happening so much in the States, but essentially like high expense cities like New York City, San Francisco, where it's like very expensive to live during the pandemic, where you can work from anywhere, why stay in a city that has high rent and high living costs, right? So the other areas of Canada, I think they were catching on to this work from home phenomenon. So they're like, you know what? Bring your Toronto money out East Coast where we, need it. So I was like, when I saw that TikTok, I was like, yes, sign me up.
But they comped you 60%.
Yeah, so they comped me 60% of my living expenses. So like between me and my husband, I think we only had spent like something like a little over $2,000 Canadian for a month of living. This includes the living, the cost, the car, like everything. And I was like, yeah, sure. I mean, it's cheaper than going on any vacation.
Oh, wow. Okay, so you moved.
Yeah, just for a month.
For a month, and you came back.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. This is fascinating. And then what happened after the sabbatical? Oh, when did you start teaching product management at the university?
Yeah, so the teaching was actually more of a long tail type of event. So back in, actually, I think it was 2020, the school had reached out because they were doing early research about whether a program in product management would be profitable. So
For
they
them.
like whether that even made sense in the market. So they tapped some individuals just to see, like, just to have a better understanding of what product management is, like what would an educational program look like if they were to do it. So I had helped them back then. It's just a pure volunteer basis. And then when they got the green light to go ahead with it, and they formed a advisory council, they asked if I would be on it. I said yes to that. And then during my sabbatical, I had reached out to them and said, hey, like, I have nothing, but basically I had nothing better to do. If you need help with anything, let me know. And then later in 2021, they had said, hey, like, we have an opening for the Capstone course if you'd like to take that up. And I was like, yeah, sure, I have time. A lot of it had to do with me having time. I think sabbaticals and like time off, like intentional time off from work, is so underrated of what it can possibly open doors to, because it's very easy to say, well, you're not comping me for my time, I'm not really doing, like, you're not paying me what I'm worth, and then closing that off as an opportunity altogether. But because I had time, and because I was a lot more open to these type of things, especially like random conversations with strangers, that's really what opens opportunities down the line. And it's just, I will never look at sabbaticals the same way. I will always appreciate when I see it in somebody's like CV that they took some sort of career break.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, that's amazing. So you still teach there?
Yes.
And you're still teaching this capstone project class, or you're teaching more?
So I teach. So the program itself consists of 4 courses, and they're like, it's really aimed for people who are product curious, trying to learn more about product. So they could be like individuals who work with product managers are trying to build more empathy towards the product managers they work for. They could be aspiring product managers. They could also be people who are just like, I heard they make more than me, so I want to see how I can become one. So we get like a full wide range of individuals that come in. So the program is built up where they do like an intro class where they go through like the fundamentals, then they do data for PM, and then design for PM, and then a capstone course to cap it off with a practical project.
Oh, I see. I am on the York University website right now. Oh, is it the certificate in product management? Is it that one? Hold on. Let me share my screen.
Oh, you can share your screen on this thing?
Yeah. This one?
Yeah.
So this is what you teach.
Yes. So I teach the capstone course of that program. The program has 4 courses and 4 different instructors.
Oh, and how long is the program?
It runs for a total of 6 months, and it's designed as a part-time. So like students are like, they don't have to take time off work. It happens like
Oh.
every Wednesday in the evening. So it allows for students to take it in a more leisurely pace. So it's not a boot camp. So it's not like 8 weeks intensive or anything like that.
Oh, I see. Okay. So you teach this one.
Yeah.
Oh, it's 4 classes.
Actually, no, that's a typo there. That's 8.
Oh. 8
Yes.
classes.
Yes, 8 classes.
Wow. Okay. Tell us more about what this class. Wait, this particular course. Wait, sorry. So this is a program that has 4
Courses.
courses.
Yes.
And they're all they happen one after another, or
Yes.
they're all happening parallel? Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
one after another. That's why it takes a total of 6 months. So like students will start in September with the first instructor, and then they won't get to me until February, at least for this upcoming year.
Oh, okay. I see. Okay, so what do you teach in this capstone class?
Yeah, so the capstone course was really designed to help people gain practical skills and really wrap up what they have learned in course 1, 2, and 3 into something a little bit more tangible so that they can include in their portfolio. And so what I do to target that is basically students will walk through an MVP build approach. And the last 2 words being very critical because they're not actually going through the whole MVP build process. Really what I'm looking for is somebody to be able to identify a problem and validate whether that is something worth chasing. And that's something that I found actually a lot more challenging for individuals. And it has a lot to do with the audience that this particular program attracts. So for example, we get actually quite a few mid-career pivoters. So people pivoting from some career into product management. And one of the things I've found that is particularly challenging is learning this problem customer focused obsession that we as product managers need to have, because quite often they have to unlearn something that they have to unlearn something that has made them very successful in their career already. And that is particularly challenging. So like, for example, the demographic of the people inside the course. So like I would say like most product boot camps or schools, when I ask like what's the general age range, it's usually around the 25 to mid 30s that you're going to see. Mine goes all the way up to 55.
Oh.
With a lot more people on the latter range.
So interesting.
Yeah, so they're coming in from something else, right? They may be product
Okay.
adjacent. A lot of them might not be. And unlearning is one of the biggest challenges. For example, one of the common things you'd see is somebody saying, without going anywhere, they're like, I want to build an app to solve this problem. I'm like, but what is the problem? And they very rarely can articulate it in their first go. And that's really what we work on, is how to articulate problem spaces and understanding what a good problem statement is, and really understand how to deconstruct what it is that they're doing in their head already into something a little bit more product oriented, so they can really understand why framing a problem is really most of the work in this early phase of MVP design. It's not so much about, it's like students, I think, are very keen on like, hey, let me go on Figma, let me throw buttons and look at my sign up page, like see the sign up page. I'm like, no, that's cool and all, but what problem are we trying to solve here? So I find more often than not, that's really what I'm repeating over and over again with different students, is just how to focus on that particular skill. But because they're coming from somewhere else, it's hard.
Super interesting. I put the link down here for anyone who might be interested. Super cool. I didn't know about the age range and that they would have to unlearn things.
Yes, that is actually probably the hardest part about teaching that I did not anticipate, because I had thought that a lot of these, hey, they would have done a lot of reading already. There's so many great resources out there. A lot of LinkedIn educators, yourself included, just talking about product thinking, product sense. I'm like, great, you're already exposed. You guys can start on this project right away. Definitely not the case. Not the case at all. So that's why we kind of simplified what that project is, to really have them focus on this one particular skill and know that, hey, there's other skills that you need to, finish an MVP, but problem framing and really learning how to validate or even talk to customers. Like, for example, some of the students struggle with being able to have effective customer discovery calls with people, because very often they will lead with, what if there was an app that solved all your problems. You'd like that? Yes. Okay, validated. And then they go off and then they should write in their report that, hey, yeah, I validated. It's great. And I'm like, okay.
And how do you know that they validated?
So a lot of it's a written report, right? It does
Okay.
honestly go back to an honor system of them understanding what those steps are and going through the process. So the way we framed that course and how they work through the project is I'm basically their coach and mentor through the doing one-on-one. I call it more sparring sessions where they show me what they have, and then I'm here to challenge some of the things that they've brought up and see how they
Wow.
defend it, and then see how they grow over the 8 weeks. And then so we have that component that's allowing them that practical experience. But then on another component about that course and why I love it so much is the sheer exposure. So going back to my earlier note about like having mentors and having that exposure. So in that 8-week course, I also bring on guest speakers, and I bring on a total of 21 guest speakers in a span of 8 weeks. And one of the big reasons for it has everything to do with understanding my limitations as a PM too, because I strictly only have experience in early stage startups, meaning there's a whole realm of product that I just never had exposure to. I can't really even speak to it effectively. So I try to get a collection of different product managers for different industries, different levels, different seniority as well. So like, for example, I brought on somebody who just became a product manager for the first time, like within their first 6 months, come into the course to guest speak. And I had people who have been like, those product leaders that have been doing it for forever and a half. I bring them on to just give students that perspective of what product management looks like and why, and really understand the nuance of the answer of like, what does a product manager do? And like, the answer is it depends, but why does it depend? Like, what does it depend on? And what is the context that they're bringing to the course? So that's another big component. So they'll have those as like the live class sessions, and then sparring sessions with me.
Oh, wow. Wait, so all of these are live sessions?
The 8 classes, yes.
Oh, wow. And how long have you been doing this?
I've
Since
been doing
2021?
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Is it once a year, twice a year?
Twice a year now.
Oh, okay. And what's the application process like?
I'd love to tell you, but the school takes care of that.
Oh, okay.
Going back to like, they take care of so many things. I'm spoiled.
Oh, sure. And so, how does one become an instructor?
I don't know.
Okay.
So I always attribute a lot of how I got there was just again, maybe I'm not giving myself credit at all, but I just said a lot of it was luck, being at the right place at the right time. A lot of the new instructors that we've had, some of them came through referral. I could tell you like course 2 and 3 are product managers in my circle. So yeah.
Oh, okay.
I don't know how one becomes instructor. Yeah.
Got it. Okay, so let's talk about your food blog. What happened there?
My food blog was one of my many adventures into just being more of a creator. I think I realized that now that I was always had that creative spirit. So like many Asian people, I also identify as a foodie. I'm not very unique there. And then I think I was doing like food reviews on like different sites. I think that was how I started. I started on Instagram. I would start like taking photos and then just commenting of what I thought about a dish. And then again, somebody gave me the suggestion to start a food blog. Okay. So then I fired up a WordPress account to have a food blog where I would post my photos and a more detailed explanation. And then that started picking up a bit. I think at one point I became one of the top 50 food bloggers in Toronto.
How do I find your blog?
It's completely defunct now. I took it off because I couldn't maintain it. And I was like, oh no, I just don't have time for it. But like I do think that I don't think it's completely gone out of my like story. I feel like it might do a comeback, but in a very different way.
Okay.
But and then I started pivoting over to recipes. And that was when I really understood like wow, this is hard work. I started hanging out with a lot more food bloggers, understanding the challenges they go through really running these type of businesses. Yes, there's money to be made. Like I remember there was one food blogger I followed, and this was like back in like again the mid 20 teens. Like they would pull in like 100 to 200,000 USD a month,
Wow.
and from a food blog of all things, and they'd be content engines of managing their schedules, also manage. And if you think also your personal space, because a lot of these food bloggers are operating these recipe uh, experiments and photography all inside their house. So you can imagine there's a ton of lights, all this kitchen equipment, and just managing a schedule of how you're going to maintain that kind of content. And you're also thinking very well in advance too. I remember sitting on one session where they're like, you really should do content planning. So like, for example, by now you should have your Christmas content scheduled out. And I'm like, it's August. I don't even want to think about the Christmas shopping and decoration. And they're already thinking about what recipes, what are the trend. And I realize and I appreciate like the entrepreneurial spirit that these food bloggers have, because they're figuring this all out with tools. A lot of them are bootstrapping their businesses and getting it to that level where they're now like making advertising dollars and sponsorship dollars. It's insane.
And this blog led you to a gig with Pixar.
Yeah, it was part of it. It was definitely part of it. So that one kind of came across as, I think, also right time, right place. So I was tapped as a cultural consultant for Pixar, and I had not known at the time what it was that I was speaking to, what project I was helping, and they had asked like, do you have demonstration of your work for like this particular culture? So like for full context, Pixar's Turning Red is not just of a Chinese girl named Maylin in Toronto. She's actually Taishanese, so it's a very specific a subset of a Chinese person in Toronto. And a lot of the Taishanese, actually, you'll see them in like a lot of the old cities in the US as well. So they were the ones who more or less so set up the original Chinatowns.
Wait,
And
what is this ethnicity called?
called Taishanese.
What is that?
Yeah, so a lot of them were individuals who actually were brought onto. You know about the trains, the Golden Mountain, the train to across. No,
Tell me.
okay. So again, I think a lot of this mirrors a lot of the stuff that's happening in the U.S. at the same time. So North America in general was looking for cheap labor to be able to build the railroads that connected the country together.
Okay.
And a lot of that cheap labor came from a very specific part in China, or a lot of it did, and it come from this area of Taishan. Why, I don't know. I don't really know the full history on why, but a lot of them came over, and a lot of them came over with promises that, hey, this is a place of opportunity. You can eventually pull in your family here. So they were the ones who did a lot of that sacrifice of building the railroads, and then also set up some of the original Chinatowns. So if you ever go to those old cities, like San Francisco is actually a lot of the West Coast has it. So in Canada, you'll see it a lot in Vancouver, and then the US, San Francisco is one of the older ones.
So it says Taishanese alternatively romanized in Cantonese as Taishanese.
Yes.
It's a local dialect.
Yes, it's a local dialect, and it comes from a very kind of it comes from the province of Taishan.
Wow.
Yeah.
I had no idea. Okay,
yeah,
okay.
It's a very specific part in history that I don't think everybody knows about. So obviously, I think for these Chinese people, when they originally came, a lot of their family, well, okay, minus some head tax issues and things like that, a lot of their families are still here, and I'm a descendant of one.
Oh.
So I am Taishanese, and because I had been my grandparents did a lot of the raising here. So like for context, my great grandfather was here first.
Okay.
Brought over my grandfather, then my dad was born here, and then I was born here. So, but because I spent
Oh,
a lot of my time with my grandparents growing up, like they were the ones doing a lot of the caregiving, I learned the
okay.
language, I obviously the food, and my mother is from China and from that area as well. So I had learned, I kind of grew up in a household where like my dad was born here, but my mom wasn't. So I had
Okay.
this kind of like half and half
Yeah.
experience growing
Yeah.
up, and I didn't realize how unique that was. So
Right. Oh, I
yes,
see.
so that is what ties me to that movie.
Oh, and you talked about this in your food blog, and that's how the producers found you to be their consultant.
Not found me. So like I had basically that how they found me and how they were connected was through another a mutual connection that we had that referred me that,
Oh.
hey, if you're looking for somebody who is Taishanese, here's somebody. But
Oh,
what for and like how qualified, like no, I don't think any of us really knew except for the individual who was looking.
I
and
see.
and then when we were going through the meeting and then they were asking for like any sort of sample of work that might demonstrate my culture or anything like that, I said, well, I actually wrote a bunch of recipes that are from my family because
Oh.
it was triggered from my grandfather's death. And I was like, we should actually start to document some of them. I kept the documents, the blog's just down. But
Oh,
so I showed him that blog, and I'm pretty sure that helped.
pretty sure it did. Oh, wow. Wow. I have goosebumps listening to that story. Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. And then what was your experience like being being a consultant for Pixar?
Um, the most I can really share about that whole experience is that it was a masterclass in imposter syndrome. I think like I had never and I thought I had felt that by the like like going through the sabbatical, the burnout there. I was
Yeah.
like I thought I had experienced it all, like in terms of imposter syndrome, because I didn't believe that I was like anybody else. Um, but in that moment, I felt like such a fish out of the water, it and to have and also to experience the production process of a movie and to see how they like in a way do product management, obviously very different context, but to see how they respect the creative process and of
Yeah.
how things also isn't very precious. Like there's things that you hold precious, but then a lot of it isn't, because all of it is to serve the bigger purpose of telling an amazing story. And to see a team work towards that, and
Yeah.
like I was such a small piece in this whole entire puzzle, very
Yeah.
very small piece, to even witness a little bit of it was incredibly humbling, and forever going to hold a very special part in my memory as, wow, that was such a cool experience. The seeing my name in credits was definitely like the cherry on the top. I'm like, wow, I still didn't believe it was real, by the way. I kept thinking like this is all a prank, no way, not happening.
What was the like how did they manage their product? The product, I'm assuming, is the movie itself,
Yeah,
right?
well, a good resource to like look at that is actually publicly available is I think if you have a Disney Plus subscription, you can see how they made the movie Frozen. I think it was Frozen 2.
Oh.
And to see the way that they would deconstruct that story over and over again, because things just aren't working or things aren't
Mm.
hitting the audience, because I hadn't realized, especially from that documentary, that they actually have audiences that they do expose when they get to a certain level of production. They do have
Yeah.
audience members that are
Oh.
invited to see, and then
So
they go through that feedback. And I'm like, this is so similar to what we as product
oh.
managers do.
So they do user interviews?
They well, not so much user feedback. So they would say,
User
okay,
feedback,
like watch
okay.
a version of the movie and then like write down what you thought about it, what you loved, and they would get like people of different age groups as well, like the kids,
Mm,
because Frozen 2 obviously is targeted
right.
for a very specific age group, but they also invite parents to say like, what did you love? Like, did the jokes hit notes for the children just as much as they hit for the adults? And I was like, that is so insane. And every single aspect, they're really thinking about a lot of things that go into a character development that don't actually end up explicitly on screen, but you
Hmm.
really appreciate the process of how they kind of came to be. Like when they talk about like the costume design, Even though this is an animated character, they really think about like what are the colors, what are the lines and structure of the things that they wear. Wow, I so appreciate this, and there's so many things to learn from it.
So they do a lot of user research and they take feedback really seriously.
Very seriously.
Mm.
Like
And
even in the documentary, I remember there's a particular part where they said, okay, even the camera people are not allowed into this because this is when they were digesting the customer feedback after one of the audience sessions for Frozen, and I was like, wow.
wait,
Like
why can't camera people go in there?
I don't know. They just cut that part of the process. So like they were showing the whole process up until that point, and then they said, okay, this is like the final. I think that must have been like the final cut where the directors are like making the final decisions of what feedback that they really wanted to keep and whatever. I was like, wow, they really take it seriously there.
Is the director more like the PM or the producer more like the PM?
I'd say it's definitely a tag team. I wouldn't know it as detailed as somebody in Hollywood, but like I could definitely say like the directors makes a lot of calls. Yeah.
Got it. From a creative point of view or from like a mechanical operations point of view? Both or both?
I think definitely both.
Okay.
Yeah, at least from what I can tell, which is very, very little. So do not quote me on this. I am not an expert. Probably won't be going back to Hollywood anytime soon.
Guys, so what's next for you after all of these amazing experiences? So you'll continue to teach.
Yeah.
And then what else? What do you want to do now? You'll go on lunch club.
Yeah, go on lunch club. But the thing is, like, I think the one lesson I have had is that life is far more interesting when you don't have an explicit plan. Now, this is like goes against everybody's like advice about how to manage your career. I know Shreyas Doshi did one about like how to manage your career well and things like that. And I'm like, oh, great. But I'm like, I'm going the other way, which is like, I'm just going to let my gut tell me what fascinates me next.
I love that.
And although like, I just have a much more fun time. Like none of the things that I mentioned in terms of like those fun experiences came from me explicitly planning anything. It came from me just being open and curious about like what comes next and making sure that, hey, that bottom bar that I need to meet to make sure that the opportunity makes sense for me is there. Then the rest is just up to me. And I don't know, maybe I'm a little broken and delusional inside, but I just have this like innate feeling that everything's just going to be fine.
You're not broken. You're not delusional. you are an inspiration. And I want more people to be more open-minded. So for me, if it wasn't for the layoff, I would never venture into coaching. And me becoming a coach was also a journey because, you know, Asian family, Asian parents, we're raised to do the quote unquote right thing. And the quote unquote right thing is always get a job, work hard, study hard, work hard, right? That's the mentality. And so when I say I'm a coach now, they're like, what?
Oh yeah. Well, to be fair, my mother still doesn't know I ever took that sabbatical. Okay. Like I say this as a joke. Like I have a very dark sense of humor, but my grandmother died thinking I still was an accountant. Like remember the accountant was back in university. So like I just, you know what? I started recognizing at some point that like parents, especially the more traditional value holding ones, they're on a need to know basis. Like if you don't need this, I'm not going to share that. So my mother still doesn't know I ever took a sabbatical.
Yeah. How about now?
Well, she still doesn't know. She just knows what she needs to know, that I'm still alive and well, and that's all that really matters, right?
So true. But if it wasn't for that sudden thing that happened to me, which is, you know, the layoff, I would never venture out of my comfort zone.
Yeah.
And now that I am not doing the conventional thing, which is, you know, work in a company, get a paycheck, like work hard, you know, now I'm seeing the world in a completely different way. And I'm connecting with people in a completely different way. Like how you and I just connected, how you and I are like, yeah, sure, let's do a live stream. Like no agenda, like no marketing, let's just do it. Like this to me is is fun and dynamic and alive,
Yes.
more
But
so than
yes. And I'll
like the
tell you one
commercial.
thing, as a
Yeah.
person who's done that whole fun period and then went to full-time work, I was worried. And this might be for you in a later time. I was genuinely worried that I might lose it all. Like
Lose what
I will
all?
forget what it's like to have fun and just go right back into the same situation that
Right.
burned me out in the first place.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
could tell you it never leaves you. You'll always maintain it. And it was a big eye-opening experience. I was actually genuinely scared. I was speaking to my mentors right before I started full-time work again.
Yeah.
I was like, I'm afraid I'm going to lose everything I've gained through this magical period
Right.
that I call my sabbatical.
Yeah.
But I was surprised at how much it didn't. But a lot of it had to do with a lot of preparatory things. Like, for example, I guarded my time like no tomorrow.
Yeah.
For example, I wanted to always maintain that there's a part of my portfolio of work that always maintained, like, I have no idea what I'm talking about with a lot of people, and that's okay.
Mm.
And so
And
you'll never lose it.
what made you want to go full time after that sabbatical?
For me, it was, maybe this is like a trauma response, but after going through the hardships that came from burnout, I'm very curious to see if I have learned something again. Do you know what I mean? Like, there was a lot of learnings in my sabbatical and I felt amazing, but I wanted to test it. I wanted to understand, like, am I feeling great just because I don't have a boss, I don't work anymore, I can manage my own schedule, or like, can I actually step back
Right.
into that full-time role, but with these new tools
Right.
and new set, like, well, not new, like a actual set of mentors that I can lean into and talk to whenever things get hard. Can I do that now?
Yeah.
And I was just too curious about that path to
Uh,
not explore that at least one more time. And I
yeah.
feel like I feel that again now too. So, like, definitely what's coming up next for me is I would still like to explore another type of role, this time exploring a different area that I didn't get to explore in the last role. So it's just like I'm just still ever curious about
Mhm.
things and people. And now that I know that I can keep that portfolio of
Yeah.
the fun stuff,
Yeah.
I feel better equipped to try the hard stuff again.
That's amazing. And what is that area that you want to explore in next?
So so a lot of it has to go back to the principles of product management and why I even keep product in my teaching. Of why I won't like teaching it is because it challenges me to really think about the decisions I've made, why I did them,
Yeah.
and whether I would do it again and how I would do it differently. So
Mm.
I'd like to do that, obviously, with a little bit more skin in the game with
Mm.
managing a product. So
Mm.
I'd like to keep going with that and see if I can really hone my craft, because I find that, I mean, that was the reason why I was pulled in the first place, which was
Mm.
this ever curiosity of, like, can I make things better?
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Wow. I feel like I should just shut my computer after this discussion and just sit with my journal.
You maintain a CRM. Like, that's my journal.
And so how often do you do lunch club now?
So I do it not as frequently as I did
Mm.
before. So I don't hit the 6 a week, but I hit like maybe like 2 or 3 a week.
Oh, I
So
see.
just people, like, there was one person I meet people from, like, by the way, the most fascinating part too is, like, people from walks of life you definitely would never have run into. Like, for example, I once connected with an ultra high net worth coach, like, person who coaches ultra high net worth individuals. If, in case anybody's wondering on the live, I am not ultra high net worth. I'm not any, like, like, no sizable dollars are assigned to my name. Okay, so I'm, like, sitting there learning lessons that she would share to her ultra high net worth clients, and I'm like, wow, wouldn't have thought of things like that. But okay,
Wow.
obviously not moves that I can necessarily play directly in my life, but very fascinating.
Wow. I have to give this a try.
Yeah,
Are
you
you
never know.
able Yeah, are you able to
Yeah.
pick and choose, or is like a random matching thing?
It's a random matching thing. They say they use AI to match you based on interests.
Oh.
And, well, at least, again, maybe more attributed to my personality, but I haven't had a conversation that sucked.
Oh, wow.
Every conversation has been like, oh, that's pretty cool. I learned something new. Or I was able to share something that they learned. It was always, like, fantastic.
Oh,
I
wow.
never regret a lunch club call.
And are you able to choose how many you do?
Yep.
Can you decline a match?
Well, you're always you always can say like no, but I always recommend like just go for it. You never know what can happen from a conversation.
I've never
Also, you
done
get to
anything like this.
practice. Yes, you can practice how to hold a conversation. I tell you that is like the coolest skill that I have, in terms of being able to also, if you ever do customer discovery calls again,
Yeah.
best skill to come in with, because you know how they always say like once you get customers really talking, that's really
Yeah.
when you do a lot of
Yeah.
learning. I'm like, where do you get that skill from? Well, having 300 one-on-ones will help.
Well, how do you think I did at holding this conversation?
Yeah, you did really well. Yeah.
Yes. Wow. Okay. Okay. Well, do you think they'll match us in lunch club?
Maybe.
That will
Who
be
knows?
fun.
Yeah, I have no idea. I don't think I've exhausted their library of people, because they just have, it's global. So you get
Okay.
matches on different parts of the world. It's
Okay.
very cool.
Okay. Wow. I learned so much. Well, thank you so much for coming on my channel and doing this serendipitous live stream with me.
Yeah, no problem. Maybe next time we can ask you questions.
Oh, sure. Oh, yeah. It was just me asking you this whole time.
Yeah.
All right. Stay tuned for part 2. Let's do it. Yeah. Okay. I
All
would
right.
love that. I would love
Yeah.
that. I'm going to take you up on that offer.
Yes.
Okay. Sounds good.
Okay.
Then
All
let's
right,
plan
bye.
for part 2.
Yes.
Bye.
Okay, bye.